Well, day two of Russia's war in Ukraine. Yesterday, I talked more about, kind of why this is happening, pre-game kind of stuff, not really going blow by blow on the war. Today, I'll focus more on what's actually happening. Thankfully, someone on Twitter took the time to make up a map of where exactly the Russian forces are, where the fighting's going on, so I could get a better idea. Even though that was early in the day, that was like around noon I saw that. Things change very quickly in this kind of a situation, but at least gave me an impression for where they're at, where the fighting is going on. And something that I think people need to understand is that we are hearing all about bombing and explosions and stuff going on all over Ukraine. It seems like the Russians are everywhere. They're not everywhere. It's that they are bombing and blowing up targets all over the country because they're trying to soften up the military there. And apparently also now they're starting to move in on more civilian infrastructure. I was hearing earlier in the day, at least yesterday, they hadn't taken out civilian infrastructure in that, like cell phones and things are still working. And I think they still are because people are tweeting out and whatnot. But they did, I believe, attack a power station in Kiev, just in Kiev, earlier today and knocked that out. It looked like it was a coal-fired plant, not like a nuclear plant, thankfully. The Russians did capture Chernobyl, and the Ukrainians are saying, "Oh my gosh, the Russians are endangering, the world because they're not properly maintaining, the Chernobyl, and they could let, the reactor, melt down again or something like that." I think that's pure propaganda. The Russians. It was the Soviet Union when Chernobyl melted down the first time. The Russians should know how to maintain that. I'm not worried about any sort of issue at Chernobyl. But as far as where there are actual Russian troops on the ground fighting, shooting at Ukrainian soldiers or Ukrainian citizens in a lot of cases, because they are now arming their citizenry. By the way, I just want to say, apparently Kiev, they've distributed 18,000 AKs to civilians there. I am all for that. I believe that a civilian militia, can be much more effective than having a standing army when you get invaded. Just look at the Taliban. The Taliban is able to defeated both of the 20th century's global, superpowers. They defeated the Soviet Union and they defeated the United States. So I think having a civilian militia, disorganized guys, is the best national defense you can have. But the problem is, they're just now giving all these arms out to civilians as the Russians are, literally at the gates of the city. So you've got all these professional Russian soldiers who are going to be going up against people who have never held a gun in their life, because it's not like they have the right to bear arms in Ukraine. And so this is dumb. I think you're going to end up with a lot of dead civilians because, I don't think that the Russians would, ordinarily be going through and just massacring civilians. But if all these civilians have guns and they're out in the streets and they try and fight the Russians, well, then, yeah, the Russians are going to shoot them. And so, I don't want to be cynical and say that they're doing this on purpose just so that they have the bad visual of all these ununiformed civilians dead in the streets when Russia comes through and they have to fight like house to house. I don't want to be that cynical, but it's still, if you want to have a civilian militia like that, it reminds me of, what was it called? I think it was the Volkssturm, part of the Nazis' last ditch. They started handing out World War I rifles, like Gewehr 98s, long, the long-barreled, like 29-inch barrel Mausers, to people in Berlin, and they called it the Volkssturm. That was a last-ditch thing. Didn't work out that well either. So I'm not too optimistic for how things are going to go in Kiev, because the Russians are there. Kiev is very close to Belarus. It's not, it's in the center of the country if you're looking east to west, but north to south, it's on the far north end of Ukraine. And so there's not that much of the country that the Russians have had to go through in order to get to Kiev. Now, the Russians, there are also Russian boots on the ground on the south end of the country where Crimea is. If you kind of look, I guess, to set up sort of the four cardinal directions, on the north, if you look on a compass, where north is pointing, right in the middle and straight up, you've got Kiev. if you look on east, on the compass, you've got Donetsk and Luhansk in the far east, right in the middle there. And then if you're just looking south and in the center, you've got Crimea. And then on the far west, you've got Lviv, Lvov, Lemberg, whatever you want to call it. I think I'm probably the only person in the world who thinks of it more as Lemberg, but that's because I'm more familiar with it as an Austrian city than a Ukrainian city. That kind of came later. But just for you to think about it, out of those four cardinal directions, those big corners of the country, Russia's kind of, they've got the influence in 2 out of 4 of those right now. They're trying to take Kiev. It's unclear if they're going to try and take Lviv. So you've got Russians down in the south coming up through Crimea, trying to capture the area just outside, just on the mainland from the Crimean Peninsula. I would imagine, at least in part, in order to free up the water supply, which was cut off from Crimea after 2014. They also apparently took some island off the coast of Odessa. There's fighting going on in Odessa. We're hearing explosions and things. I don't know, but they're certainly on that island off of Odessa. There were Russian troops which took the island. It's called Snake Island. And then, of course, you have fighting in the Donbass. So out of those 4 quadrants, those 4, I guess, major areas, you've got conflict in 3 of them. The most important one right now being Kiev. I would imagine it's not like the Ukrainians are going to take back Crimea. They're not trying that. It's just the Russians are trying to project power out from Crimea, expand that bubble of Russian control down there, because they've already got troops there. Makes sense. In Donetsk and Luhansk, seems pretty clear they're trying to capture all of the of Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts, because the separatist governments only control part of those oblasts. They don't control the whole thing. And so from what I understand, they do control the land between Belarus and Kiev. So you would think then that they should be pretty good as far as supply lines go. They've got a clear shot from where they're fighting in Kiev back to Belarus. Obviously, in the Donbass, that all borders Russia. They can bring in resources from there. Crimea, they can get resources, either from the Black Sea, or from across the bridge, because there is a bridge going from Crimea to mainland Russia. It doesn't seem like they've really overextended themselves, and that they've got, because it would be a problem. Let's say they went on a blitzkrieg, and they went deep into the heart of Ukraine, and then things started to take a little longer than they expected, and they run out of food and run out of ammo or something like that. That would be a big problem. It doesn't look like, now I'm not a military expert, but just looking at the map, looking at how close, they're fighting really close to the border in all these cases. Kiev is not very deep into the country, relatively speaking. If they were trying, we're hearing about them, I guess, doing some bombings in Lviv, maybe a little bit, but there are no Russian troops all the way out there, very far inland. You're not seeing Russian troops, south of Kiev, in the middle of the country, way north of Crimea. And from what we're hearing, less than half of the Russian military really is involved with this so far. Some estimates were even going as low as 1/4 to 1/3 of the Russian military. Now, I don't know exactly how big the Russian military is, so I'm not going to speculate on that, but these were not exactly pro-Russia accounts that I saw making this point, saying that it was, no more than, that it was less than half, or even maybe as little as 1/4. It seems even on the pro-Ukrainian side, there is a consensus that Russia is not using its full might here. Russia is holding back. And so, therefore, they still have a lot more pressure that they can put on Ukraine if they do put up a fight. People are saying that, it looks like this isn't going as easy for Putin as he thought. It's like, well, it's been one day. I don't know if Putin expected to conquer a country the size of Texas with a population of 41 million people in literally one day. It seems a little extreme to me. People can talk about blitzkrieg all they want, and the Nazis were able to conquer Europe so fast. It's like, well, when Hitler invaded Poland, he didn't do it by himself. Stalin helped. Poland had no chance. They were getting invaded from both directions. Ukraine is getting invaded from two directions, but it's by one country. And I'm getting out of my depth here, but it's just I don't get the impression that industrially and militarily that modern Russia is Nazi Germany. Now, what's interesting is what we're hearing and what we're not hearing coming out of this. The Ukrainian military is very eager to talk about whatever accomplishments they claim to have made, and what the situation is going on from their perspective. The Russians, maybe it's just because you're not going to see a lot of favorable to Russia on the English language side of Twitter. Maybe if I spoke Russian and I was, searching on there, with Cyrillic letters and things and actually reading Russian, maybe I could find more of a Russian perspective. But it's been hard to find, many people who are, I don't want to say overtly pro-Russia, but people who aren't overtly pro-Ukraine, because it seems like everyone I'm finding on Twitter is, all the open source intelligence accounts, certainly, they're all 100% behind Ukraine on this, and so, they might be, they're less likely to call out BS things that the Ukrainians might be putting out. Although I've certainly seen them do that. I mean, the OSINT guys are, it's not like they're letting all Ukrainian propaganda go. Like, there was a video, apparently, of a MiG-29 shooting down I think it was an Su-27 or something like that. Obviously MiG-29, very old and relatively primitive fighter jet compared to an Su-27. And even the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense tweeted this out, and apparently it was from Digital Combat Simulator. It was not real. We keep hearing, but I am seeing guys retweet, people who I thought were somewhat respectable, retweeting this Ghost of Kiev story, which to me I've seen no evidence of. They just say, oh, look, there's this fighter jet flying over Kiev, and they go, oh, he shot down 6 Russian aircraft. It's like, well, what is the evidence of that? Where's that coming from? There's no, I haven't seen much attempt to confirm this. It just seems, this seems like a pretty typical propaganda thing to me. It's the story of a spaceship shooter arcade game. It's the lone fighter jet taking on the Galactic Empire. Another thing the Ukrainians are claiming is that they shot down, I believe it was an IL-76, which IL, I know what it stands for, but I can never pronounce the name. I have no idea how you say it. It's like Ilyushin or something like that. There's a lot of Russian planes named IL whatever. I assume it was some old Soviet guy. I remember them more from like World War II stuff, but I'm sure the guy lived long enough, or maybe they named a factory after him and all the planes they made were named that. Anyway, it's a big plane. It carries up to like 150 paratroopers. We're told that they shot down this really big plane. It's a big plane, 150 people. It takes, I don't know, I didn't look up exactly how big it is, but, I'm thinking at least C-130 size, probably bigger. And so, if that thing blew up, even if you didn't get on video, it should have been a big enough boom that the people in the surrounding area would have gone to look at the crash site, see what it is, and like post it on Twitter. So I'm pretty suspicious of that. But you're going to get a lot of stuff. And here's the other thing. I mean, I can't find the Russians bragging about doing too much of anything. And again, I'm looking at English language Twitter mostly. So maybe that's why I'm not seeing any. Maybe the Russian military is putting out a lot of stuff, and I'm just not seeing it. But my point is, just because we're seeing the Ukrainians are the ones claiming all the kills. I wouldn't assume, one, that everything that they're saying is correct and that they did, take out however many Russian assets as they say. But also, you can't just pretend because the Russians aren't bragging as much that they aren't doing stuff. I would imagine, nobody's having a fantastic and wonderful time out there. It's war. There's a lot of videos coming up of just, grisly scenes of dead Russian guys. but you're not seeing Ukrainians post the videos of the dead Ukraine soldiers. See what I mean? It's happy, to trample on the graves or dance on top of the bodies of these dead Russian guys. But I'd imagine there's a lot of their own guys dead out there too that they don't want us to see. There is a propaganda war on top of, embedded within every conventional war. So it's very hard to get a sense of what the actual truth is. But I would say my instinct, looking at the map, I don't think it'd be that difficult for Russia to sustain a siege on Kiev from the north at the very least, because they've got such a clear, there's not a lot of distance between there and Belarus. They can secure a highway if they need to, and continue to supply their troops. They've got fresh troops on their way there right now from Chechnya. I'd be a little nervous when I see the videos of the giant, I don't know what they call them in Russia, like what we would call battalions or legions in Rome or whatever. These hundreds of guys all wearing their uniforms and chanting Allahu Akbar. It reminds me of Franco's Moors, to be honest. And I was thinking earlier with the siege of Kiev, it was reminding me a bit of Madrid. Of course, referencing the Spanish Civil War, a very understudied conflict. It's a very interesting conflict, and I think it's much more applicable to the rest of the world than, say, studying the American Civil War. The American Civil War is very interesting. It's a topic I love, obviously, as an American. Watched lots of movies, during the Civil War, whatnot. I love Gone with the Wind and The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and plenty of others. I love good American Civil War stories, but the Spanish Civil War is just there's a lot more there to draw on. There's a lot more lessons, valuable lessons to be learned about these conflicts. And the city of Madrid, even though the rest of the Spanish countryside and whatever, the nationalists were able to mop up a lot of Spain rather quickly. Madrid held out for quite a while under siege. But one thing you learn from that is that a siege is not fun. And eventually, the city will fall. Now, maybe the folks in Kiev will think of themselves more as Leningrad rather than Madrid, because, of course, Leningrad did hold out for the entirety of World War II. It never fell. But if I remember correctly, millions of civilians died. Maybe that's overstatement. Maybe it was just 1 million. I'm pretty sure it was over 1 million people died in the siege of Leningrad. There was an insane amount of mental toughness in the people of that city, which, of course, now St. Petersburg. At the time, I like to use, the correct names for cities at the time. It was named Leningrad, although, I don't like when before that it was named St. Petersburg too, and it was renamed that. I don't like it when you have communists go through and rename cities. So I begrudgingly call it that, but anyway, that's what it was. I think that the people then were a lot tougher than the people of the modern world. And I don't think that the people of Ukraine, I've never been, or the people of Kiev specifically, I've never been there, but I would imagine it's a pretty modern city. A lot of just normal Western liberal people live there right now. I don't think that they could tolerate what the folks in Leningrad went through during World War II. I don't think they could, I don't think that they could survive a sustained siege from the Russians, because that does seem to be the plan. That's what we're hearing. Of course, always take that with a grain of salt. There could be Western propaganda thrown in there. Maybe the Russians don't plan to siege at all. Maybe they just plan to go march right into downtown. But urban warfare is not pretty. And I would imagine that the Russians would try and avoid it if they could. Especially when you've got all these armed citizens, you don't know who's an enemy and who's not, and who's a civilian. And then you just get into a thing where your troops are on edge, and they think that and they just shoot anybody that moves, and that's not a situation you want to be in as a military. Because then you end up committing massacres, even if it's not intentional. You know, you hear somebody go bump in the night, and then you just you spray a building, and and you shoot 15 people who were huddled, just trying to keep warm. So I think that the Russians ideally probably want to cut off the city, um, and just wait for a surrender. I will say I respect that Zelensky is staying in the city. I wouldn't have expected that. Nothing against him personally, but just I would expect him to pull more of a Ghani. In a country like this, it's just typically the political elite are not going to want to stick around. And maybe the real power players in Ukraine, they probably left. Zelensky, um, I I felt for a long time now has been way in over his head. He seems like a genuinely kind of nice guy who's trying to do things, and uh, he but he's become a puppet to a great extent. I think he's gone against almost everything he ran on. I remember when he was running. I mean, he was running it to be a president very different than the President Zelensky that Ukraine has ended up with. I mean, he was elected to prevent this very thing from happening, really, to prevent a war with Russia. He was elected on a platform of détente and dialogue and reconciliation. I think I don't know if there's what the word for that is in Russian or Ukrainian, but I would say that was the message that I really got from his presidential campaign. And now he's hunkered down in the capital, just sort of, I mean, in his words, kind of waiting to die. He said earlier today, this might be the last time that any of you folks see me alive, in a video that he put out. And if he's serious and he doesn't plan on trying to escape, if he really is going to go down with the ship, I respect that immensely. I don't think that, no, I know for a fact I wouldn't. There hasn't been, it's because there hasn't really been a European war in my lifetime. Or really a war in any countries to where I have any real affection for anybody. And it's not that I have any affection for Russians or Ukrainians. It's just I don't think they're bad people either side. I don't think either of them are devilish. I don't hate either one of them. It's one thing talking about before the war starts and who I think has making a better case of whatever their dispute is. But once this war is started, I really, I'm sympathetic to both sides in that I don't really want to see either of these two sides destroyed and annihilated. It is, it's making it I feel quite ill looking on Twitter when, people retweet these images of dead Russian guys who are burnt up and go like, yeah, you got, I hope that same thing happens to all the rest of you Ruskies. And it's like, these are 18-year-old kids who, they don't have a choice of where they get deployed. This isn't, they didn't necessarily want to be there. I mean, I guess it comes from my, I was earlier saying the U.S. Civil War just isn't that relevant or applicable to the rest of the world. But in studying, when I was younger and we studied the Civil War in school, I'm probably one of the last cohorts of Americans who grew up being taught to respect both sides of the U.S. Civil War. And so it taught me that in a war, you don't necessarily it's not always good versus evil. Sometimes it's just people versus people. And people are both good and evil. They can be either, and they're neither 100%, one or the other. And so, I learned to respect, even though, you have, Confederates and Union soldiers on either side of the battle, or on either side of the war. We have monuments to the dead of both sides. At least we used to in this country. That's changing now. People are being taught, you have to hate one side in order to justify the war. And, it really reminds me of that when I see these people, disrespecting the dead Russians. I mean, yes, you're seeing videos of dead Russians now. I'm sure that there are also Ukrainians who are dead and whose bodies are in less than dignified positions as well, charred and stiff. And I really, I would hope that you don't have people cheering that on either, though I know that I know that they do. because Ukraine and Russia are so close, this almost has the it almost has the tinge of a civil war. It's close to it. I wouldn't quite call it a civil war because, I mean, the Ukrainians who are passionate enough to fight against the Russians deeply feel that they're different. But then again, that's what you have in civil wars. You have extreme passions, usually on both sides. I think that probably the Ukrainian side is where you're going to have most of the passion. I wouldn't imagine that, the average Russian soldier has a deep-seated hatred for Ukrainians. When all is said and done, though, I think it's a foregone conclusion. The Russians will capture Kiev. The question is, at that point, what happens to the rest of the country? I think that it would be inaccurate to assume that the Russians could capture and occupy, well, they've already said they don't plan on occupying for an extended period of time, but really capture and tame the most rabidly anti-Russian parts of Ukraine. One of the reasons why and I think so many others were so certain that this war would never come is that, sure, can Russia, militarily defeat Ukraine? Yes, obviously. But the question is, afterwards, then what? What do you do then? What are you going to do with that country if there are millions of people there who don't want you around? Like I said, there are so many Russians who were around for the war in Afghanistan. They know that if you have a population that really doesn't want you there, you're not going to be able to have any real victory. And so, with that, I mean, it's obviously off the table that Russia would just annex wholesale, all of Ukraine from Donbass to Lviv. So what will they do then? Will they try and install their own regime that will govern all of Ukraine? Will they try and, split up Ukraine between East and West, leave a Western rump state that hates Russia, let it be, a hate Russia state that will probably join NATO eventually, and then make an Eastern Ukrainian state that will, serve as a buffer between Russia and NATO, or will they annex the East? I don't know. I'm going to think about that more while Russia's in the process of capturing this country, but I have no illusions that the Ukrainians are going to be able to hold out forever. So, with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow with another update. Obviously, don't come to me for all the news about it. This is a commentary channel. I give my opinion on my takeaways from the day. So, I'll see you then.